And so, my friends, we now move on to the semifinals in the Skilling Open. It's Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi, and it's Hikaru Nakamura and WESLEY. So that's how I will make this recap. I'll cover all the games of one match and then all the games of the next one. Before we get into all of this, just want to say thank you. We crossed 200,000 subscribers today, actually already 201. The channel's been growing at a crazy pace, so much positivity in the comments from all of you, and I can't thank you enough. I look forward to make more content, one video a day, if not two, and maybe we can start our quest, our journey to become the biggest chess channel here on YouTube. So, having said that, let's jump into the games. You guys wanted the time per player per move. Unfortunately, it's impossible to get that because the games are hosted on Chess24. They're just hosted on a different website, and I make the recap on chess.com. But I'll try to keep you up to date of the time situation. Today, it's not too important. Okay, so Magnus plays into Jan's Grunfeld defense. And he plays pawn takes, knight takes, and rather than the main line, which is the move e4 in this position, you get bishop d2, the point of which is to take with the bishop. And later, the point of which is to play d5. So you're trading the Grunfeld bishop away from black. Here we get bishop f3, we get bishop g7, and after king g7 and takes, black is able to put the knight in the center and attack the pawn on f3. This doesn't win the knight because black will go f6, blocking the pin. So instead, Magnus just castles with the same thing in mind. Queen c3 would pick up the material there. That's why you always have to look for checks. Okay, before you play a move like knight takes f3, you really should go, is there any checks? Queen c3, okay, I can't play it. And we get c6. Now, everything up until this point has been seen before in practice, and Magnus plays something called a novelty, which is a move that has never been played in recorded games. If two guys got drunk and played some blitz at the bar, it doesn't count, even if they created it first, because it got recorded nowhere. So we get bishop h3, king g8, Nepo leaves this diagonal, because he wants to take. We get queen c3, and here Nepo plays the move queen b8, which defends the knight. Except for the fact that it doesn't defend the knight at all. Magnus here has a really cool idea. So, first things first, the move f4 looks very good. It looks like it traps the knight. The knight can't go here. But the knight can go here. You say, what? What about this? Well, now we see the point of putting the queen there. That pawn hits the king and the bishop. And this was Nepo's whole idea. But Nepo missed something here. He missed that there's another way to attack the knight. Something called interposing. Now, on defense, when you interpose, it's when you put a piece between two pieces. Like, you defend by blocking its vision. And here, you interpose. You block the queen's vision of the knight, and this knight has nothing it can do. If f6, you have f4 and pawn takes pawn. So after e d6, now you have f4, and look at the difference. The queen doesn't see the pawn anymore. Nepo just missed this, and played a little bit, you know, just for the sake of playing. Magnus converted very nicely by playing rook d6. If rook takes bishop, you have rook d1, and this is unstoppable. And then he flexed one more time with bishop e6. And the same exact idea, and you just cannot stop the rook from coming to d8, and Nepo resigned. Okay, time for the second game. Nepo has the white pieces, Magnus plays a Sicilian, which is already, well, I mean, he's played it many times, but this is a surprise. This is called the Accelerated Dragon. We get d4, and there's a lot of ways to play this with white. Most of them include queen d2 and long castle, but rather than going for an aggressive kind of like Yugoslav attack, it's called, if you'd like to go look it up, Nepo goes for a much more positional dragon with h3, stopping knight g4, and then castling short. He's welcoming this trade. He's welcoming it because he's going to open up his rook. He's going to be happy here, and he has a lot more space. It's very difficult for black to actually get anything in the center. White can also play a move like knight b3, which stops black from ever playing the move d5. But Magnus plays b6, queen d2, bishop b7. Nepo plays a nice idea here, f3. Blockading this bishop with 3 pawns, rook c8, and a very natural bishop h6. Now, normally the rule here is you don't take, because that just helps them get their queen in, except Magnus breaks any rule and plays e5. He attacks the knight, forcing it to retreat, and he plays a move that just looks impossible. He plays a move that doesn't look like it can be played, b5. Very common in the Sicilian, you try to create counterplay on one side of the board. And b5 is possible because if knight takes b5, there is queen b6 check. So b5 cannot be taken. Nepo plays a3 and accepts that he will damage his own b-pawns. Actually, Magnus can even play b4 here, trying to triple stack. But Magnus strikes back in the center with d5. They trade, Nepo moves his king out of the way, queen b6, and puts his his knight in the center, and Magnus plays f6. That prevents the knight from coming to g5. Okay, he plays a pawn move like that, rook c1, and here Magnus made a mistake, potentially his only mistake of the game. Very tough to see why it's a mistake, but the engine really liked here that he could play f5, and just go for like something like this, where this attack on h7 is kind of getting nowhere. And then he'll just focus on creating counterplay with e4, maybe even queen e3, pinning the knight. Basically, the engine says, come get it, no, and shuts it right down. But Magnus went back to e7 to try to go knight f5, and what this allowed Nepo to do is it allowed him to trade some pieces. So literally everything got traded, and now this is just equal. Nepo is no longer under any sort of pressure. Magnus just tries to stabilize. Nepo locks the center, locks the pawn structure on the queen side with b4, and players are just kind of moving around. And Magnus lackadaisically plays the move knight e7. Lackadaisically, meaning because he just thought that there was going to be a trade, and Nepo all of a sudden says, wait a second, queen c7. In queen and knight endgames, if you can trade the queens in a way that you're going to win some pawns, that's what you should do. There was just nothing that could be done here. If you play something like queen e6, then I'm going to go queen a7, you just can't move. You're paralyzed. I'm going to take, or even knight c7. So this is very bad. Magnus is now trying to hold a pawn down endgame where even in a bigger problem, he's got 3 on 1 on the other side of the board. So it's just 3 pawns versus 1. Nepo basically sacrificed the pawn here because he could just bring his king. And this is really a lesson in mobile pawns. You know, one guy has a 3 on 1 here and doesn't take a free pawn, because what that would do is it would kill his mobility. Tripled pawns don't count as 3 pawns. That's kind of like 1.5. So Nepo keeps the tension over there and just brings his king. And then he plays knight d5 because his knight is going to go to e7 to g6 or to f6 to take this pawn. Magnus sacrifices the g pawn to take the pawn in the center, but Nepo is coming. He's going to get this. Magnus plays knight f6 and brings the knight to d5 to try to get this pawn, and we get take, and take. And here, you cannot take this pawn because of the most absurd board geometry you probably have ever seen. Magnus here will go back. Every single piece is interacting here. You would say, how? Well, the kings are tugging at the knight, right? The king has to stay protecting the knight or else you're going to lose it. But anywhere you put the king, the knight forks you. If king e4, knight c3 wins this pawn. King, knight, and 1 pawn versus king and knight is not winning most of the time for the guy with the pawn, because the knight can sacrifice itself for the pawn, and king and knight versus king, you cannot win. You cannot checkmate a king with just 1 knight. If the king were to go to f5, then knight e3. So, seeing all that, Nepo played knight g6 and blundered the exact same idea of knight e3 check, winning the g2 pawn. Say, well, wait a second, he's guarding it. Yeah, but the problem is the king gets the pawn. The king and the knight are not fast enough to stop the king from getting over here. Knight e3, king b4. It's just a draw. A crazy, crazy blunder from Nepo, which is why the video is named Magnus is a Magician. I hope that's what I named it. Just stunning. And rather than playing knight g6, if Nepo had just pushed the pawn here, for example, this is a win. For example, king c5, king b4. Now, this is a very rare case where king and knight and pawn beat the knight because the knight cannot move. The knight literally has no access. If something like knight a6, g5, knight c7, your king is too fast. You can also play g6, and look what's happening. You're just too fast here. You will get this knight out because the king is too far away. So you will play something like, check here and here. So like check, and because the king is so far away, you will get the knight out by virtue of maneuvering in such a way that the knight runs out of squares. You can also do it like this. Look, check here, here, and then deflect the knight away. So for example, let's say king d4. You can play knight g4 and knight f6. There's even ways where you can like sacrifice the knight, for example, and then make a queen. Not in this particular case, but so it's difficult, and I'm not faulting Nepo, but he blundered, and Magnus was able to draw the game. Okay, Third game. Another Grunfeld. This one mainline with e4. So c5, this is all standard theory. And then here, Magnus goes for a repetition of moves. He basically offers a draw with bishop d2, queen a3, and bishop a3. Basically thinking like, okay, Nepo's obviously going to repeat. But Nepo doesn't repeat. Nepo plays queen c3 and queen b2. Because he senses that Magnus doesn't remember the exact line. He doesn't remember the exact thing, and Magnus is okay with the draw because obviously he already won the first game. So, okay. Now, Nepo wins the a2 pawn, and after a few trades, just starts pushing his pawn. I mean, at the end of the day, in the Grunfeld, if you get two-pass pawns, you should push them. You should push them. You should push them. You should continue to try to push them. But now Magnus creates a little blockade. And what happens is that Nepo obviously trades off the queens and breaks out with g5, shattering the center here. gf4 and bishop c2. But what Magnus does over the next few moves is he gives himself the best practical chance to save this game by trading off a bunch of pieces. He trades off as many pieces as possible to get it to a rook and 2 versus rook and 4. But the good thing is that these pawns are awful. Awful pawns. And it's really hard here for black to win this position. In fact, as the endgame goes on, it becomes clear that Nepo doesn't quite know what he should do. And he had his biggest moment right around here. Nepo had to sacrifice the f-pawn in order to give a check and force Magnus's king into a difficult situation. So, for example, if Magnus goes for this pawn, there is rook d4 cutting off the king from coming back, and then you just bring this king to help the pawn promote. Very common in rook endgames, you have to help the pawn promote with the help of a king, if possible. So this would be one way to try to win, but Magnus wasn't taking the pawn. And here, Nepo again should have tried to bait this. This would have cut the king off from this area of the board, and then if something like b4 happens and the king chases, you have rook g5, and you would win this pawn. And here Nepo instead played rook d2, allowing rook b8. So Magnus realizes that he can sacrifice the g2 pawn, give a very important check before he takes on b5. It's actually, taking on b5 might draw, but rook b6 forces the king back, then he takes, and this is a drawn endgame. This is just a drawn endgame. H and F pawns in a king and rook endgame versus a king and a rook is a draw, if you know how to draw it. You can, I'm sure there's some tutorial on YouTube to draw it, you don't need to know how to draw it, but H and F is a draw if you defend the right way, and that's exactly what he does. He just shuffles his pieces around. As long as this rook gives away this H pawn, it's going to be a draw. King, rook, and one pawn is a draw against king and rook. That's called the Philidor position. Maybe I'll make a video on that in the future, but as of now, I don't have any. This is just a draw. And Magnus saves yet another game against Nepo. So we move to the fourth game. Nepo's got the white pieces. He's down 2-1. He's got to win the game. So, of course, he plays e4, and Magnus plays e5 this time because he wants to be solid. And, of course, Nepo plays knight f3, and Magnus plays knight c6. Nepo plays bishop b5, knight f6. And Nepo, instead of going into the Berlin main line, goes into the Berlin. Not the main line, but he plays into a position where the pawn structure is completely symmetrical. The pieces are completely symmetrical. And Magnus is able to just trade a bunch of pieces, like the queens and the rooks, and then the pawns, and nothing ever changed, and then the bishop for the knight, and then trade some more pawns, and trade another pawn, and just shuffle his king around, and trade another pawn, and play h4, offering Nepo a draw, and after king takes, you have rook takes, and it's just a draw. I don't understand this game at all. I don't understand the methodology. I don't know. That's all I have to say. Nepo had to win with white, and he played into one of the most solid systems that black can play. Where this is like 50% split. I mean, it is so rare one side wins. I don't know. I don't know. That's the best way that I can describe it. You know, when you've got to win, you would expect an anti-Berlin. Bishop c5. Take, like, to create some degree of imbalance in the position because you have to win, but he just couldn't. I don't know. And Magnus takes a 1-0 lead. So we move on to the match between Hikaru and MVL. No, not MVL. MVL's not back from the dead. Wesley So. Hikaru starts the match versus Wesley So by trying to give him the scholar's checkmate with Queen H5 and Queen F7. But Wesley has seen that before and plays Knight F6. Joking aside, this is called the Bishop's Opening, and it's a cool way to avoid theory. To play Bishop C4 and D3, you sometimes don't even put the knight on C3. You'll play like Knight D2, Knight F3. It's kind of an interesting thing. But it becomes kind of standard, and actually Hikaru had this against Sergei Karyakin from a couple days ago. He had it with the black pieces. Wesley plays Knight A5 and takes the bishop pair with Knight B3, AB3. Hikaru transfers the knight away from C3 because the bishop on B4 never took the knight, which is kind of the point of putting it there. But now the bishop for black has to transfer back to C7. And notice what Hikaru is doing here. With Knight F... this knight just went Knight F3, Knight H4, but I was just saying that if, the knight was coming from the other direction, that would have been its trajectory. Two knights go to F5. Very instructive outflanking. H4, F5, Wesley plays D5, and Hikaru plays Queen F3. Here the engine suggested an absolutely absurd, non-human-like move, and that is Queen to D2, blocking the development of your own bishop, threatening, for example, after A6, that wouldn't happen, but just if it was White's move, threatening knight takes G7. Completely beautiful idea. The point is that after Queen H6, Bishop G5 is winning for White. Yeah. Well. So instead we got King H7, and Hikaru played Knight H5, and now Wesley plays G6, disregarding both of the knights, and here the move Queen E3 looks like it wins, because either of the knights that you take, I have Queen H6 and Queen G7 mate, but here Black would have played knight back to G8, unfortunately. A ridiculous move, but the best one. And now you're just forked. you have no choice. You're going to lose a knight. So Hikaru has to bail with this knight D4 idea. If queen takes, then this. If this, then this. And, well, Wesley's just slightly better now. He's got a very active position, but Wesley tries to break in with the bishops, and Hikaru just moves the queen over. This is always kind of looming now, and the players ended up just kind of locking up the center. Trading this very nice idea, Rook A4, trying to get this pawn. Pieces were traded, and Hikaru drew the first game against Wesley. They just repeated moves here. I think Hikaru was pretty happy to start this with the draw because he missed this this G6 idea, he said afterward, and he felt like his position was just worse. So we go to the second game, and Wesley himself plays E4. Hikaru goes for a line that he played many times already. We've seen this many times. This is Italian. I don't know if, like I said, I don't know if the players had some agreement, maybe some Italian sponsor. But everything here has been seen, but then Hikaru comes up with this Knight H7 idea. Not over the board, of course, he's prepared it. No one's ever played Knight H7 and Knight G5. Kind of transforming the structure. Maybe in the long term, you can use the H file by playing G6, King G7, playing the Rook to the open file. But Wesley plays D4, then throws in the capture on C6, and here there was a big question in Hikaru's position. Which of the central pawns would he move, or would he play F6? He played C5. And, well, the worst nightmare here starts to come true. Wesley plays D5, backing up the bishop, and A4. Now the A pawn can't move. The bishop is entombed, and so Hikaru has to hope that C4 works. But C4 is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand you open your bishop, and on the other hand that pawn has no guards. So Wesley plays Queen F3, Bishop C3, and just like all of this looks so dangerous. Bishop C5, Rook E2, defending his queen side. F6, Knight F5. That is a $1 million knight on F5. Taking it is just not good enough because the queen takes. And Wesley played great. They shuffled a little bit, but Wesley doesn't take the draw. They shuffled one more time here. Wesley doesn't take the draw and plays Rook C1, Queen D7, and Rook C2. That's it. There's no way to protect this. And the second that this bishop goes to the other side of the board, Wesley finds a very crucial breakthrough. Good lesson. You have more pieces lined up to where you're trying to attack than your opponent has defenders. Look for a key pawn break. Now Wesley plays H4, which is a move that I'm not sure many of us would consider. Attacking on the same side with the pawns, not taking back, but actually lining up now the queen to the king, and then sacrifices a bishop. And he does that by taking a pawn. Rook E2, he realizes that he has enough time to transfer the rook over, and that's exactly what happens. He disregards the Hikaru's sacrifice in defense, rook g5 and queen h7, and here Hikaru resigned the game because after king g6, there is check, and you're mated. You're just mated. Try to see if you can find the mate. Queen f6 and rook h8, and that's it. Game is over. WESLEY takes a 1-0 lead. Next game, Hikaru has the white pieces, and he plays into a semi-Tarrasch with c5. Now, here white can do a variety of things, but cd5 is standard. But WESLEY surprises Hikaru with cd4. Normally here we get something like knight d5, e4, knight c3, bc3, cd4, cd4, bishop b4, bishop d2, queen d2, castles, bishop c4, knight d7, castles, b6, rook d1, bishop b7, rook e1, knight f6. You get the point. I'm sure you guys all knew this already. I'm sorry for wasting your time. Instead, WESLEY plays cd4, and kind of some weird stuff happens in the opening. Hikaru spends an extra move going back, but WESLEY leaves himself with an isolated pawn, and then trades off some pieces, and plays bishop e6, queen c7, and they both castle. WESLEY's objective here was just to kill the game. I mean, he's completely fine drawing because he's already won. Hikaru tried to create some practical problems, but by damaging his structure and by playing c3, but WESLEY was just super solid. Trading pieces, offering a trade of rooks, bringing his king, knight hops into d3 and comes to c5, forking the pieces. He immediately takes because 2 rooks versus 2 rooks, he's not going to lose. The players trade the rooks, and, well, WESLEY does his job. I mean, his job is to not lose when he's up a game, and he doesn't lose with black, which sets up an exciting final round matchup, where now Hikaru has the black pieces, Hikaru has to play for the win, and Hikaru faces a guy who plays d4, and, 2 years ago, final round of the US Championship, over the board, Hikaru had black, and he had to play against d4 Jeffrey Zhang, and when you have to win with black, you play the Dutch. And he plays into WESLEY's main line, castles, and WESLEY plays b3. Normally, white plays c4, but when white wants to not lose, white plays b3. Very low risk. Hikaru immediately aims to mix it up with the early knight c6. Not standard. And then knight e4, and then e6, and then g5! Already going for a same-side attack. The Dutch defense is fantastic. If you're like 1,000, 1,500... it's against d4, c4, and knight f3. It's a really good way to attack your opponents really quickly. In many ways, the Dutch can be a really good King's Indian because you've already put your f-pawn forward. Now, WESLEY here goes for simplification. He tries to trade the knights, and he's doing that because by damaging Hikaru's structure, he's going to make it a lot harder for Hikaru to attack. And Hikaru, meanwhile, plays g4 to kind of clamp down here. WESLEY's bishop is really passive, but his position looks basically impossible to crack. You know, as much progress as Hikaru looks to be making in this position, watch what WESLEY does. WESLEY knows that the queen wants to come and attack. So, he puts his queen, well, he just put it on a5, but he's going to put it there again. He puts his queen on a5, and that prevents Hikaru from just moving all his pieces over here. It looks like Hikaru is just a move away from, like, you know, all of this, but white is okay. White is okay. If you go for an attack down the h-file with the queen, white will just run to f1 and e2. And for that reason, Hikaru plays king g7. Now, during the live broadcast, we were actually pretty pessimistic here. We just thought, black can't do anything. I mean, WESLEY's never going to let Hikaru get rook, rook, queen, which would win, because you would just, you know, like, again, if you got the rook down here with a queen or a rook, like, it's over. But why is WESLEY going to allow that? I mean, he just has too much pressure. Rook b8, and he continues to break on this side. And here Hikaru does something interesting. He sacrifices the c6 pawn. He doesn't take back because now the rooks don't enter on the c-file. You see the difference? For example, if Hikaru would have taken back, you would get cd5 activating both of the rooks, which would be terrible news because that's way too strong. So instead, Hikaru lets him take and tries to kind of maneuver like this. Now, this is why Hikaru is a genius, and Anna Rudolph and I just commentate his games. We are IMs, we are good players, but he showed us something so brilliant after the game that I was just astonished. He showed us here that WESLEY was actually kind of close to losing, and we were like, what? What are you talking about? I mean, it looks like just black can't do anything. It turns out that hidden in this is one completely killer idea by black. So WESLEY played queen b4 in the game, but Hikaru said that queen b5 would have allowed him a move to play the move queen f6. Why? Because let's say black goes queen b7. Now there is rook to h8. And you would think, okay, well, where's the attack? The attack, my friends, is, like, let's give a move. I mean, you can take, for example, which is the most critical move, but let's just give a random move. This is the idea. Queen f3. An absolutely beautiful entombing of the king. If you take gf3 and rook h1. If you don't take, like king f1, then rook h1, and you still get mated. Why does this idea not work? It's because WESLEY is constantly one move in time. One move in time for everything. He played queen b4. Now, queen c7 would have stopped this plan. Queen b5, which is the move that I suggested. Queen b7 is trying to stop this from happening. Because what would happen if queen b7, for example, is in this position, I would give a check and I would sacrifice the queen. So let's say king g8, this is how I stop it. I take your rook. And now you don't have a second rook to mate me with, and this. So WESLEY is constantly one move in time to stop this queen f3 idea. There was another really crazy idea Hikaru showed here, that queen d6 to try to go rook h8 and something with like rook h5 and queen here to stockpile. Again, he's just in time with queen b7. So for example, if something like this, there's always lines where the queen can get into e7. So the difference here is that you just can't move if you're playing black. Again, if you play queen f6 and sack the queen, I always have this queen c7. Let me show you one more thing here, which Hikaru showed us after. In the game, we got queen b4. And if the queen goes to like g5, for example, there's rook a5. And if the rook goes here, the queen is constantly monitoring the entrance on e7. So if Hikaru like ever successfully got like, for example, like, I guess let's just say like rook h8 and queen h5, you can never actually successfully accomplish it because the queen is covering on the dark squares here. You're never going to successfully win. So like, look, queen b7, queen h5, the king is just getting away in time, and queen c7 is coming. But this queen f3 idea was so shocking when we saw it, and he said that, WESLEY was just a move away, and he was trying to set it up, Hikaru, and he couldn't set it up. And so what actually happened in the game was this. Hikaru won the c6 pawn back, but WESLEY created a blockade. And Hikaru played bishop e6 after a long thought and offered him a draw. WESLEY's got full grasp of the position, and there's nothing here. And with that, WESLEY took a 1-0 lead. And obviously, you guys know, I stream a lot with Hikaru. I'm a good friend of Hikaru's, so hurts to see him lose, but at the end of the day, WESLEY played better in the second and first game. He defended better in the first game, and he took his chances in the second game. So tomorrow, the players will play more rapid. Magnus versus Nepo, well, obviously Hikaru versus WESLEY. If Hikaru and Jan win in the rapid, they will play Blitz and Armageddon. If you guys want to catch it live tomorrow, maybe you do, maybe you don't, I'll be streaming it on my Twitch at 12 p.m. Eastern. That's 10:30 at night in India. That's 6 p.m. or 18 o'clock in Central Europe. That's 9 a.m. in Pacific. That's 6 a.m. if you're from Hawaii. Let me know if you're from Hawaii. And thanks once again, guys. This has been awesome. And I look forward to finishing off this tournament with the recaps.